Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast and thank you for tuning into this solo episode titled Bodybuilding Over 40. By the time you listen to this, I'll officially be 28 because my birthday was on June 14th. So happy birthday to me. I am 1 year closer to 40, but I'm not quite 40 yet. However, I do have a lot of clients who are in their 40s and above. And one of them specifically, Riz TM, just to distinguish him from my other Rizes, requested this podcast. And when I asked him, oh, that's an interesting topic, what would you like to know about bodybuilding in your 40s? Then he sent me a list of really intriguing and pertinent questions that I am going to cover in today's episode. I also want to be honest and admit before I start that if Riz hadn't asked me to record this episode, I probably wouldn't have done it myself of my own accord, because I would have been uncomfortable about the prospect of seeming patronizing because I'm not 40 myself. At the same time, one of my own clients asked me to do it or suggested I do it, which suggested to me that it is something that other people would want to hear from me. And I do have some value to share because while not being this particular age myself, I have and continue to work with a lot of clients who are over 40, and I have observed enough data that I believe sharing what I know could be helpful to you. But I also wanted you to know where my head is at, because the last thing I would want is for you to think that I'm trying to speak to you in a patronizing way in this episode. Now, moving on to the actual conversation I want to have with you today, the underlying premise of the episode is that you are getting into bodybuilding for the first time in your 40s. And by bodybuilding, that could be the competitive sport, but it could also be that you have a physical and a health goal. So you're planning on following a hypertrophy specific or muscle building specific training program coupled with nutrition to improve your health, gain muscle and or lose body fat, which is essentially what bodybuilders do, but they simply take it to a more extreme degree for the purpose of their sport. So it could be that you are a competitive athlete or want to become one, or you are a non-competitive bodybuilder who simply wants to follow a bodybuilding lifestyle to improve your health and fitness and your physique as well. So starting with the first question, that is, can or do people over 40 gain muscle as well as those younger, or should we have different goals? First off, I don't believe, sorry about that, my vowels went weird right there. I don't believe in saying should or shouldn't. However, you do want to have realistic expectations. Anybody can build muscle at any age. There is some really interesting research in people in their 60s, 70s, and above showing that if they are complete beginners to resistance training and they start training, they gain muscle despite their age, which is incredible. So starting at any age will change your physique and will bring you huge mental and physical health benefits. However, there are 3 caveats that you want to bear in mind. First of all, there is a natural health condition known as sarcopenia, which is defined as the decrease in muscle strength, muscle quantity or quality, and physical performance that occurs gradually with age. Sarcopenia can start as early as in your 40s, and at first it's gradual, then it picks up as you get into your 60s, 70s, and older. This makes muscle growth slower than when you were younger because you're putting on muscle, but you're also slowly every year losing a little bit of muscle. So the net muscle gain is less than if you were in your 20s when sarcopenia hasn't started yet. However, the best and only ways to counteract sarcopenia include number one, to be active with both lifting weights and some form of cardio. Number two, to avoid obesity or to revert the condition of obesity. So, fat loss can be a great goal to set for your own health if you're currently overweight or you have obesity. Number three, to eat enough protein every day. And number four, to lift weights to build muscle. And number three, to eat enough protein every day. So, yes, sarcopenia makes it harder to build muscle than if you were younger, but it's not impossible. And all of these activities that result in muscle gain will also benefit your health because sarcopenia can pose a very realistic danger to your health as you get older. So, yes, sarcopenia makes it harder to build muscle than when you were younger, but it is not impossible. And in addition to that, it is a condition that, as you get older, poses a risk to your health and independence if you continue to lose too much muscle mass. And it can be actively counteracted by lifting weights, eating well, and losing excess body fat. The second caveat is a condition known as anabolic resistance, which isn't going to affect you immediately in your 40s. However, as you get into your 50s, 60s, and above, the anabolic response to protein decreases, meaning that if you're 20 and you eat 40 grams of protein, that's going to result in an anabolic or muscle building response of, let's say, 80%. When you turn 60, that same 40 grams of protein might only yield a 60% anabolic response or less. So it is a great time in your 40s and over to get started on your diet, to start eating a much higher protein intake than you may be eating right now, unless you're already perfect with your protein intake, so that by the time you encounter the issue of anabolic resistance, you've already built a habit of eating enough protein to counteract that. And the final caveat is that if you're getting into bodybuilding at 40, you have less time to develop your physique than someone who started in their 20s, who by the time they hit 40 will have had 20 years to build their physique. Whereas you're starting now, you're already in your 40s, you don't have those 20 years. So when you two both hit 60, the person who started at 20 is going to have more muscle mass than you. But once again, everybody can gain muscle at any age, and starting at any point is going to be better than never starting. The next question is, if a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old both started bodybuilding at the same time and trained for 5 years with the same nutrition and trainings, in what ways would their outcomes be similar or different? And I chose this question as a follow-up on the above. First of all, we also need to include the caveat that these two people are essentially the same person living in two alternate realities, because the same training program, the same nutrition would only yield the same results if we're talking about the same person. If your DNA is different, then the response is not going to be the same, even if you were the same age, the same sex, the same everything as the other person. So, with that caveat out of the way, the results between this 20-year-old and this 40-year-old would be different, mainly because the 20-year-old is not undergoing the process of sarcopenia, is not going through menopause, if this is someone who has a menstrual cycle, probably doesn't have the busy career and demanding family life that you have in your 40s that makes your stress levels skyrocket. And as a result of all this, the 20-year-old sleeps like a baby, has all the time in the world to eat, plan, cook their meals, and go to the gym. They haven't started undergoing sarcopenia just yet, and they have the best anabolic response to protein they will ever have, so they are going to get better results. A follow-up question on this one is, does being on HRT affect that? And I decided to interpret this question in two different ways. So the first interpretation was that HRT is used in this context to transition medically from your sex assigned at birth to your chosen gender. So if that's how you're using HRT, then in my experience as a coach, hormone therapy is going to affect you in a similar way in your 40s as it would have when you were younger. That is, if you're taking testosterone, this is going to help you build muscle at a faster rate than ever before because you're increasing your testosterone levels from your assigned female at birth levels to above and beyond what's physiologically natural for your body, which is the same as a cisgender woman taking anabolic steroids, which results in an exponential increase in muscle mass relative to what they would have been capable of without testosterone. If you're a transgender person taking estrogen, then you're likely to undergo the opposite process, whereby by suppressing your natural testosterone production, you will end up losing some muscle mass and strength. But to my knowledge and in my experience working with clients, there is no difference in your response to training and nutrition, whether you're 40 or 20, that is affected by HRT per se. Of course, this also depends on when you started taking HRT, because if you started at 20, or this is going to be a little bit different than if you started 2 days ago and you're now 40, in that at the beginning of taking hormone therapy, a lot of people start experiencing menopausal like symptoms. They might experience an increase in hunger and several other symptoms that are associated with what's called a second puberty. Whereas if you've already been taking testosterone for 20 years now, you're not going to have those symptoms anymore. So that's how it might change. But again, it's not dependent on age. It's dependent on the time when you started taking HRT. My second interpretation of this question is that you are using HRT and you're an AFAB person or a cis woman who's hit menopause. So you are taking HRT, you're taking estrogen, and sometimes testosterone, depending on what your doctor believes to be best for you, in order to relieve menopausal symptoms. In this case, there is going to be a difference between you taking HRT and you not taking HRT, in that if HRT is right for you, and it isn't for everyone, and you need to talk about this with your doctor, but let's assume that it is right for you. This means that your symptoms will be relieved. So you'll find it easier to be consistent with the right diet and training, and as a result, you are going to get better results, better outcomes in terms of physique and mental and physical health than if you were trying to get into bodybuilding whilst also dealing with all of the symptoms associated that can be associated with the menopause. The next question is very interesting because I'm a nerd and I love these kind of questions. And it is our metabolism slowing down in our 40s? If so, how does that affect our nutrition goals? And there is a fantastic paper on this by Herman Ponzer and colleagues, which explored the relationship between age and metabolism. And this paper found that metabolism does not seem to slow down between your 20s and your 60s. So, across all of these life stages, it doesn't seem to slow down. But what does seem to decrease is your average energy expenditure. So, as people grow older, it seems like energy expenditure goes down. So, they're moving less and less. And as a result of that, they're burning fewer and fewer calories, which is yet another reason why it's so important to stay active. Because if you move less and you have a lower energy expenditure, it means that you need fewer calories to maintain your weight. And it's harder to maintain your weight on fewer calories because we live in what's called an obesogenic environment, meaning an environment that encourages the development of obesity, which is down to the fact that we're surrounded by food adverts on TV, in the street, everywhere. We're surrounded by really cheap, highly palatable, high calorie food. So if you can stay active, not only will this benefit your mental health and your physical health, but it will also make it easier for you to maintain a healthy weight and not to gain excess body fat. However, other than that, your metabolism does not seem to be slowing down as we grow older. The next question is anything to consider and any barriers to starting bodybuilding when you're over 40. And dear listeners, you know me well. You know I'm going to start with your mindset because your attitude can be really limiting. If you tell yourself, I'm too old to start, you've already lost. It's a limiting belief that you want to get rid of. There are also absolutely practical barriers compared to starting out when you're younger. And I want to acknowledge that because it is a little bit more challenging to start in your 40s as opposed to your 20s. As I alluded to earlier, you may have a lot more responsibilities children, a partner, a demanding career. When you're in your 20s, you might have been really busy with university or college, but you didn't have as many responsibilities as you have now. I certainly did not have the same amount of responsibility I have now at 28 when I was in my early 20s going to uni. This amount of responsibilities can often lead to another limiting belief, which is I don't have time to exercise more and to change my diet. Now, the way I would rephrase that or reframe it is that your time is precious. So you need to set your priorities straight and you need to be much more selective with the choices that you make on how to spend your time than you could be when you were younger. When you were younger, you could get away with making last minute plans and spending your time on less valuable activities. Now you can't do that because you simply have too many things on your plate to be able to afford that. And if fitness is now a priority for you, then this may mean that you're going to make somewhat uncomfortable compromises in order to get your training sessions done and your meal planning and meal prepping done for the week or for the day. For example, you may choose to wake up at 5 a.m. so that you can work out at 5:30 to 6:30 before your kids get up and you need to get them ready for school. So I would really encourage you not to think of it as a lack of time, but rather as your time being a lot more valuable, so you need to be careful what you spend it on. I would think of it as going on a fat loss diet. So now you have a calorie deficit to adhere to, meaning your calorie budget is smaller than when you were eating at maintenance or if you ever ate in a surplus. So you need to be a lot more selective with your food choices so that you still eat food that you like and you don't end up feeling really hungry and unable to focus and low in energy all day. It's the exact same approach that you want to take with your time as well. Another consideration to make is that as a result of having a busier life, you are going to be more tired than when you were younger, and you're going to have less bandwidth to make goal aligned decisions. It's going to be easier to get to the end of the day and be exhausted and go for a takeaway as opposed to a more health promoting meal that's aligned with your goal. That's why it's more important than ever to get the best sleep that you realistically can and to hone in on stress management and emotional regulation strategies. Meaning, you want to do your absolute best to be well slept so that you keep your energy up and your mental focus up. And you want to make sure that you make time for activities that relieve your stress and that you learn how to recognize your emotions, how to stop before you react to them on an impulse, and how to adopt coping strategies that don't have anything to do with overeating, undereating, or over-exercising in order to manage your emotions. For example, my client Pretty, who's in her 40s now, she's one of my clients who are members of the 40 plus gang. She's an absolute wizard at recognizing how much her stress and emotions can affect how well she sticks to her targets. And she's identified that yoga, and particularly yoga as soon as she wakes up, is really good for her. And so she wakes up early to be able to do it because she knows that otherwise she's not going to fit it in, because at this moment in time, she's really busy and she's working 12-hour days. So at the end of that, she's not going to have the energy for her yoga. That's why she makes the compromise to wake up early in the morning and get it in at that time. With regards to sleep, I appreciate that nobody's sleep is ever going to be perfect. There are very few people who can sleep like babies, 8 to 10 hours per night, and be completely refreshed the next day. But making an effort to get the best sleep that you can will make a noticeable difference. The common adage, sleep when you're dead, might have only held you back when you were in your 20s because you could spend 16 hours sleeping and recovering from a 2-hour sleep stint or a completely sleepless night, because you did have that amount of time available and not as many responsibilities. On the other hand, if you miss out on sleep now, you are not going to have the opportunity to make up for it, most likely. You do have a lot more on your plate to take into account in terms of how much energy it's going to take you to perform all of your usual daily activities, and therefore, if your sleep is continuously or chronically subpar, something's gotta give, and for most people, that's going to be training and nutrition. Not only that, but there is research showing that chronically inadequate sleep can affect your ability to build muscle and lose fat. For example, in a study on people who were trying to lose weight, they found that the group who was chronically underslept lost a similar amount of weight as the group who was not chronically underslept, but the group who wasn't sleeping well lost 60% of that weight in the form of fat-free mass, which is not all muscle mass, but does include muscle mass. Whereas the other group did not lose as much fat-free mass. And even if you weren't in a calorie deficit, inadequate sleep could still thwart your muscle building efforts because it can reduce muscle protein synthesis and change your hormonal environment by increasing cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and lowering testosterone, which is an anabolic or muscle building hormone. And this combination of changes in a hormonal environment means that overall your hormones are creating an environment that's less likely to promote muscle gain. And these are two consequences of inadequate sleep that you might not be aware of, but some other consequences that most people will have experienced if they haven't been sleeping well, or if they had a time when they weren't sleeping well, is that you can feel hungrier and especially experience more cravings. So you're less likely to make goal aligned nutrition choices and you're more likely to overeat. You're also going to be moodier, which can lead to more emotional eating. You're also going to feel more tired, which is going to make you feel less motivated to go and work out. So, for all these reasons, and given the higher stress lifestyle that most people after 40 or in their 40s live, it would really behoove you to get your butt in gear and work on your sleep routine, emotional regulation, and stress management as much as you can. And if you want to learn more on the topic of sleep specifically, check out the show notes because I'm going to have two resources for you. One is an article that I wrote myself titled A Comprehensive Guide to Sleep for Fat Loss and Muscle Growth. And the other one is a recent podcast that I released and recorded with Dr. Greg Potter, who has a PhD in sleep. And he covered some really interesting and less well known strategies that can help your sleep and that are going to be especially helpful to people who believe they've already tried everything and they're still suffering from sleep issues. Finally, another barrier that I want to bring up that's important to acknowledge is that if you are an AFAB person or a cisgender woman and you hit menopause around this time, you need to be aware that your estrogen production is going to stop. And estrogen is protective of your bone mineral density. So if you don't have estrogen, that's no bueno. That means that you're going to lose bone mineral density over time unless you go on HRT and or you build muscle. Building muscle by lifting weights is the best gift that you can give yourself after menopause because it's really going to help preserve your bone mineral density as you age, meaning there's less of a risk of you falling over and fracturing or breaking a bone. And unfortunately, a lot of people die from breaking specifically their hip or fracturing their hip when they're older because of inadequate bone mineral density. Moreover, all the symptoms that some people experience with menopause can make you even more tired and they can further reduce your bandwidth. But once again, once you get into a routine with training and health promoting nutrition, these are the two best additions that you can make to your lifestyle to support yourself through this evolution in your body. But you can hold you back if you have a black or white attitude about what's a quote unquote good and what's a quote unquote bad program or diet. For example, some people fall into the trap of thinking that if you don't train for an hour 3 times per week, then it's not good enough, so there's no point. This is a fragile mindset that you have to do away with because what you need to do is find what you can actually stick to. So instead of a black or white mindset, the key is to think, what's going to work for me? For instance, you might find that 20-minute workouts 4 days per week or 5 days per week are a lot more realistic than an hour workout 2 or 3 days per week, or vice versa. And if you want more advice that's specifically about the menopause, check out episode 66 titled Mindset, Nutrition, and Training Around Menopause, which I recorded with coach Emma Story Gordon, who specializes in working with menopausal individuals and perimenopausal individuals as well. So I'm going to add the link to that in the show notes. So these are some of the main barriers that I would think of when I'm asked this question. And the next question is, are there different injury prevention or treatment considerations for over 40s? Typically, my clients in their 40s usually have picked up some niggles aches and pains over the years. It's not infrequent for a client to show up for their first consultation and let me know that they have a dodgy knee or a dodgy hip or elbow. They get lower back pain, and so on and so forth. In this situation, first and foremost, get a proper, suitable lifting program in place, because by strengthening the muscles around these dodgy joints, you can strengthen the joints themselves, and this can help reduce the niggles, aches, and pains that you get. I am not a physiotherapist, and I cannot promise you that it will get rid of these niggles, aches, and pains, but I have seen it in my experience that it can make a large difference. At the same time, you need to be careful to choose exercises that won't aggravate these issues. And you may find that you need to warm up more thoroughly and for longer for certain joints and muscles that have picked up these aches, pains, and niggles. And that's a good segue into the next question, which is, are there different warm up and cool down considerations over 40? The answer comes down to you can get away with a lot more in your 20s and when you're younger than when you're in your 40s and over. You can't just waltz, you can't really just waltz into the gym and exercise with no warm up or no nothing as you might have done in your 20s, because your body's gonna notice right away. And in addition to that, you may find that you need a little longer to warm up before training. And that's not just because you're older, it could also be because of practical considerations. For example, when you went to uni, you might have been walking everywhere, whereas now you drive to the gym. So when you stepped into the gym in your 20s, you'd already warmed up with a 20-minute walk. Now you step into the gym and you might have been sitting your entire day. So that's why you might need a longer warm up, because now you need to make up for those 20 minutes of walking that you haven't done, which you used to do when you were in your 20. And once you've done the generic warm up, which would be a walk on the treadmill or using another piece of cardio machinery of your choosing, when you move on to your more specific warm up, which is defined as exercise that closely mimics what you're going to do for your main workout. So for resistance training, your specific warm-up is the warm-up sets that you do for each exercise in your program, or at least the first few exercises in your workouts. Where when you were younger, you might have been able to get away with just doing one or two warm-up sets. Now you might want to do 2 to 4, so more warm-up sets to gradually build up to the weight that you want to use. And it also depends on the lift. So if it's an easier lift, an isolation lift, maybe you still just do 1 or 2 sets. But if it's a really heavy lift, it's your heavier and most technical lift of the day, then you might be doing 2 to 4 warm-up sets. I've certainly found it myself that now that I am older, I need to warm up with more warm-up sets. And again, this is not just down to age, it's also down to my training experience. I'm a lot stronger than when I was 22, which is when I started training. And so because of that, that's going to have a greater impact on my joints to load up that much weight. So I need more warm-up sets to make sure that my body is ready to sustain that amount of absolute load. And if you want to learn more about how I advise my clients to go about their warm-ups, then you can listen to episode 41 of this very podcast titled A Guide to Effective Warm-ups. Once again, the link will be in the show notes. My third consideration would be that if you're aware of specific stretches or yoga poses that can help with your mobility or existing joint issues, incorporate them into your warm-ups and cool downs. And potentially consider implementing some yoga, stretches, or another type of mobility routine outside of training. Because now that you're more mature, you've accumulated a lot more years of following a sedentary lifestyle. You might not, but the majority of people have a sitting 9 to 5 job. And after university, they don't always pursue sports or exercise, so they end up following overall a sedentary lifestyle. And if that's the case, then you are going to lose the mobility and flexibility that you used to have. And that's why incorporating more yoga, more stretching, and mobility training at this phase in your life might help again with your aches, pains, and niggles, and may also help increase your range of motion for resistance training, which is then going to help you get better results from training, because if you have more range of motion, especially in the lengthened range when your muscles are stretching, you're likely going to get a better hypertrophic response. And it's going to improve your range of motion in daily life, which is going to make literally every movement less painful and more enjoyable. And it's going to maintain your independence as you grow older, because you're going to remain mobile. So overall, there isn't a huge difference in terms of what to do for your warm-ups and cool-downs, in that I don't recommend a 40 plus specific warm-up or cool-down for any client in their 40s, but likely you're going to spend more time warming up and cooling down than you might have done when you were younger. And the difference is so noticeable that I don't usually even need to encourage this. My clients tell me, hey, I feel a lot stiffer than I used to, and I started doing a little bit more yoga, a little bit more stretching, and it feels really good. And finally, I also want to say that this is very person and body part specific. I don't want you to stop listening to this podcast and think, oh my God, I am so much more fragile than when I was in my 20s, because that's not necessarily the case. I have some clients in their 40s who are totally fine. They have no injuries, no niggles, no anything. They don't take very long to warm up or cool down because they don't feel they need to. So I don't want to fearmonger with this podcast. I simply want to acknowledge what I've seen in my coaching practice so that you are aware of it, so that if it happens to you, it doesn't discourage you. You know it's potentially normal, and it doesn't freak you out either. And you also now have some strategies that I've just given you to deal with it a little bit better and still be able to pursue your goals. But I wouldn't want you to leave this listening experience today and think that you are less than because you're now in your 40s, or that you have issues that you don't actually have because I put the idea in your heads. Moving on to the next question. How should or does training change as each decade progresses? 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. Now, this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but it's realistically the only answer I can give, which is that the process is very person dependent. As I said before, I have clients in their 40s who come to me and have absolutely zero injuries, niggles, aches, or pains. I have clients who come to me and they have several of them that we need to work around. I have clients who used to be athletes, who therefore, even though they're at the beginning of their bodybuilding journey, have a very strong athletic background. Clients who have never lifted a weight or done any particular sporting activity in their life. Not only that, but their lifestyle is completely different. Their DNA and therefore genetic potential is completely different. Their understanding of nutrition and relationship with food is completely different. The only common denominator is that, not to sound morbid, but as we get older, our body literally decays. So what was always important becomes more and more important the older that you get. And what's important are the fundamental components of a health promoting fitness journey. That is stress management, emotional regulation, adequate sleep, lifting, cardio or endurance training, some mobility and flexibility training as needed, avoiding a sedentary lifestyle and breaking up sedentary time throughout the day. According to research, it's not only achieving a certain step count that seems to be important to promote health, but also it seems to be important not to get all of your steps in the first couple hours of the day and then sitting down for hours and hours on end the rest of the day. It seems to be beneficial to do your best to stand up and move around every hour, every half hour for a couple of minutes, as opposed to spending the entire time without moving. In addition to that, from a nutritional perspective, a high protein intake is important. An adequate amount of fruit and vegetables every day seems to be important. Avoiding alcohol as much as possible, or at the very least, moderating your consumption, is important. The younger you are, the more you can get away with not paying a lot of attention to these components. But the older you get, the more attention you need to be paying to all of them, and the more disciplined you have to be with hitting these targets if you want to get the best results possible, because as the body decays, it becomes harder to get results. Not impossible by any means. I have all of my clients in their 40s plus who tell me they're in the best shape of their lives after enough months spent working with me. So it's by no means impossible, but it does get harder. Finally, while this is by no means a super important component of your fitness journey, should you consider supplements? While my recommendations don't change across age ranges, I just want to give you a quick summary of the supplements that I believe could be helpful. Number one is creatine. Secondarily, whether you consider it a supplement or a food, protein powder is an excellent way to increase your protein intake without adding too many calories every day. And finally, for health purposes, I believe that omega-3s have a really strong evidence base. The final question is, any positives about being over 40 and bodybuilding, or is it all downhill from here? My client Therese has an excellent sense of humor. I wanted to end the podcast on this question because I have listed quite a few downsides of aging, but it wouldn't be fair to leave the podcast here without bringing up some observations I've made about the positives that come with being 40 and over. For one, from a mindset standpoint, my clients in their 40s and over give way fewer fucks about what other people think, so they don't feel intimidated and they don't limit themselves in ways that I see myself and younger clients do. They're not intimidated by the gym. They are much better at setting boundaries with their loved ones when it comes to social events concerning food, all of which makes it way easier for them to achieve their goals. They're also far more patient and flexible, whereby if something doesn't go their way, they accept it and move on instead of getting perfectionistic and dramatic about it like I would do and some of my other younger clients would do. So even though they used to have a perfectionistic streak, and maybe they still have it to an extent, it's much less pronounced. In addition to that, they've developed a great work ethic and gained a lot of confidence from other areas of life, such as if they've had a successful career, that really helps generate confidence and shape up a work ethic. And they can then channel these two superpowers into fitness, which once again earns them much better results. And then vice versa, when they become successful in their fitness journey, they transfer the skills that they've learned, like discipline, planning, time management, and so on, into other areas of life, like family, career, or other pursuits. And sometimes they gain the necessary skills and confidence to make some big life changes that they've kind of been sitting on for a long time. Like, it's not uncommon for my clients to go for a big promotion at work and tell me that partially they made that decision because of the work that we've been doing together, or they make some other wild move, like moving to a different country, or completely changing, overhauling their career. So, in summary, they tend to be more resilient because they no longer have as pronounced of a perfectionistic streak as they used to, or they don't have it at all. And by being more resilient, they're more consistent. And by being more consistent, they can get better results. So, no, it's certainly not all downhill from the moment you turn 40. You can still get excellent results relative to your starting point. However, you do need to accept that you're starting at a later point in life than other people. So you have less time to develop your physique and your nutrition and lifestyle habits. You also need to acknowledge that your body has lived for longer, so you need to be more careful with it, which doesn't mean you cannot train hard. In fact, training hard is one of the best things that you can do for it. It only means that you need to be more considerate. And you also need to be more on point with all of the fundamental components of a successful fitness journey than you could have gotten away with when you were younger. And the most important thought I want to leave you with today is don't let age hold you back. Whether you're 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70, your mind can be a powerful weapon working for you or against you. The moment you convince yourself that age is going to hold you back, it's going to. I'm not saying to completely disregard it. I spent an entire podcast trying to give you realistic expectations, but being objective and realistic is not the same as being fatalistic about your age. And with that, that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope that this gave you some valuable insight. And as usual, if you have any feedback for me, please reach out via my email address or my Instagram account or my website, whichever channel you prefer. I will be very happy to hear from you. And if you want to work with me, you can sign up via the link in the show notes. As always, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today, and until the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.